Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Boogie Nights. This film came out in 1997 and it was written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. This is PTA's second feature-length film, and I like to regard that, Magnolia, anything he made pre-Punch Drunk Love to be a different kind of filmmaking before he made that transition to really focusing on one protagonist. Everything in this film and in Magnolia as well had a very rhythmic feel, a very fluid flow. It felt almost kind of like a montage. Things were focused more on the ensemble of actors. And this film is just that, what I just mentioned. It has many of those grand American themes that we see in so many American films and in just many of Paul Thomas Anderson's own films. These are themes we've seen a million times: the rags to riches story, the price of fame, cautionary tale, our culture's need for excess, greed, blah, blah, blah. For me, this movie it just feels to me more like an exercise in technique, in visual prowess, in order to bring a lot of these core themes to life. And you know, PTA does it very, very well. He's obviously a very talented filmmaker. I think his storytelling and his ability to make films just got better and better and better. I mean, especially, I think he hit his peak with There Will Be Blood. And to me, this film is nowhere near on that level. But you know, for one of his first films, I think he definitely raised some eyebrows. He really invigorated the modern cinematic language, or the cinematic language of the 90s, by really breathing new life into it, while also kind of paying homage to other film directors in the process. And as I said, this film is a cautionary tale that is about the price of greed. And the story in which we see all of these core themes come to life is through the porn industry of the late 1970s and early 80s. You have a young Mark Wahlberg starring as the protagonist. He plays a character named Eddie. He's this 17-year-old busboy who is discovered by a porn director named Jack Horner, which even the name is just so fucking lame. And Jack is played with wonderful ease and just charisma by Burt Reynolds. He really sees something in Eddie. And when I say he sees something, it's definitely below the waist. And he thinks he's got great potential to be a porn star. And so he does that. And with that rise to fame comes success and accolades, popularity. But what the film seems to be saying is that time shifts things, and the culture, American culture, changes, and that can lead to the erosion of that success until you aren't who you once were. You're not as appreciated. What does that do to a person? And to me, what's more important, at least in terms of what the film seems to be saying, is how does culture reflect that excess and that hollow emptiness that we see in the characters? And the way that PTA really goes about doing this is to make this film very nostalgic. This is definitely a zeitgeist type film. It's a snapshot of culture. The transition between that more liberated excess of the 1970s and transitioning to the Reagan era, the early 1980s. You have a lot of nods here to Martin Scorsese films, especially with the very fluid montage feel of the picture, as well as a lot of the humor and especially the use of music. It feels a lot like watching a movie like Goodfellas or Casino. I definitely think that a film like Goodfellas is far greater than Boogie Nights, but you know, again, I do appreciate PTA a lot in what he's doing here, because, you know, he was still trying to find his creative voice at this point. And, you know, a lot of times I always say this to people: when you're trying to find your voice, but you don't quite have it yet, use influences, copy people, and eventually by doing that, you will find your own voice from those influences. And that's what he's doing here. There are some brilliant sequences here that I think are worth noting, but I think my favorite, or one of my favorites, is probably the one that happens kind of at the halfway point, and it's the New Year's Eve party. That's where they're transitioning from 1979 to 1980, where things are going to spiral out of control in a sense. It's a sequence that is just really, really well choreographed, full of energy and tension. I think it's really wonderful how the ensemble comes together. You see dynamic shift between certain characters and others, and that is definitely mirrored in the way that there is a shift in the culture as well. There are some new, very hopeful possibilities for certain characters, and there's also this building dread with other characters that's kind of foreshadowed throughout, and it leads to inevitable chaos. It's a lot like a Robert Altman movie as well. It's like Scorsese meets Altman, and again, you know, PTA is just kind of feeling out the cinematic language and doing it with real chutzpah. The illusion of cinema is very important here, I think, because yes, this is a movie about the porn industry, but it could easily go as be a metaphor for Hollywood as well. How Hollywood, the idea of fame for celebrities and escapism in general, is about feeling lost and trying to fill those voids with very shallow things that just lack substance, but we think is going to make us happy. It's instant happiness, but then it just kind of fizzles. I really like certain characters in the film. Probably my favorite is the Julianne Moore character. She plays a character named Amber Waves. I love the names in this movie. She's an addict. She's a porn star who has a son, and she's divorced. And her lifestyle has led her to a life of loneliness and a lot of pain. For me, she is the true heart of the film, the real pathos, which is what this film, I think, desperately needs. It really needs that, because we certainly, or at least I don't really feel much for the Mark Wahlberg character. He's meant to be that kind of, that airhead, that douchebag. He's kind of like the Justin Bieber of the late 70s. It's certainly kind of a similar story of rising to fame and then crumbling. But, you know, he's not an interesting character to me. He's not very complex. And, you know, that's fine at a sense, because none of these characters are really, really deep. We just need those other characters to build off of. And in a sense, okay, yes, this is a satire, and, you know, so many of the characters are often the butt of the joke because they are so shallow and so ignorant. And that's, again, part of the appeal, that's part of the humor. But for me, it feels slightly one note at times. And I think you can have a satire and make the character motivations complex by giving us, as an audience, more to ponder. I think that's absolutely possible. And again, I mean, I gotta reference There Will Be Blood again, that I think that, you know, Paul Thomas Anderson did his best work in that film, because I think there's definitely kind of a satirical bite in that film. And there he's showing the kind of, you know, capitalism. He's showing the greed, the ignorance, the animalism of human beings, but doing it in a way that's very dark, but also very humorous. But it's a deeply moving portrayal of a character like Daniel Plainview. And, you know, I think he's one of the most interesting characters, like one of my favorite characters in movies, at least, you know, from the last 10 years. It works on so many more levels, so many more dimensions. And I feel like it's more mature, again, in that sense, certainly, than Boogie Nights. And I would have loved to see, actually, I think it would be interesting to see Boogie Nights take the perspective of a different protagonist. You know, like Amber, I think it would be very interesting, or taking the perspective of the Burt Reynolds character, or even the Don Cheadle character. You know, it would be a very different movie, but I think I would feel more at the end of the film. There's something about this film, again, as wonderfully entertaining as it is, and as great as it is to look at. It's a great study in filmmaking. I feel slightly empty in the end of it. And, you know, there's something about all of the kind of directorial decisions, the flourishy kind of cinematic moves in it, that are less about the substance. And that to me is just a sign of somebody who is still trying to find their confidence in their content, in the actual meat of the story. And that's normal. I mean, you do tend to, especially when you're younger, use a lot of kind of embellishments and smoke and mirrors to try to distract from that fact. But, you know, you just have to practice. And Paul Thomas Anderson, with each film, I think got better and better. And I know it seems like I'm kind of bashing this film a bit, but as I said, I enjoy it. I mean, I return to it from time to time just to kind of revisit an old Paul Thomas Anderson, because it is fascinating to see his evolution as an artist. And I think that if you haven't seen a Paul Thomas Anderson film, I think this might be the best one to start with, honestly. Actually, I think you could go, you know, with this film, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, The Master, you know, so on and so forth. With this film, though it may lack the substance of some of those later films, I think that you have so much here, so much potential that you're seeing in this young director. And you know, by watching it, you get excited. You know that this guy is going to go far, and he did. He is probably one of the most influential Hollywood auteur filmmakers that we have today. And, you know, there's something to be said for that. That's very rare. So yes, I definitely recommend this movie if you haven't seen it. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below. You can like my Facebook page and link below that. You can watch more reviews here. And if you want to, you can subscribe. Catch you next time.